watching Beyond Markets. Welcome. I'm Esther Awuni.
And I'm Kenneth Igbomo. Coming up on today's show, we'll continue our series on the conversations leading to Nigeria's 2019 elections.
Now, we started off this series by setting the bar for the quality of conversations that we need to have to shape the national discourse as Nigeria's 2019 elections draw closer. On today's show, we'll find out the value proposition of one of the presidential candidates for next year's election.
Don't forget, you can always join the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag Beyond Markets and hashtag 2019 elections 410. Follow me at Kenneth Igbomo.
You can also follow my Twitter handle too at Esther O. Awuni. Now, much has been said about the importance of the 2019 elections and what it means for Nigeria's development trajectory.
Some have said it will be a daunting task for anyone who will be at the helm of affairs after the elections next year, as tough decisions need to be made to reposition the country on a path for stronger economic growth.
Donald Duke, presidential candidate of the Social Democratic Party, joins us now to share his value proposition for the country. Donald, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thank you very much.
So, big question, what does Donald Duke have to offer?
Changing the narrative of Nigeria, which is what we need to do at this time. We need to strategically reposition Nigeria to deal with our teeming population, to be able to express the desire of the average Nigerian for a nation that provides opportunities for them to express themselves in varied spheres. And so, in other words, what I would like to see my presidency do is help Nigerians achieve their full potential.
Okay, but when you look at the process moving on to the elections now, do you think we can get free, fair, credible elections in Nigeria?
It's something we ought to aspire to. It's difficult to have a free and fair process in a democracy where there are a lot of inadequacies. Inadequacies in infrastructure, inadequacies in opportunities for people. So politicians take advantage of folks because of their circumstance. But it's what we have to work with. And so one of the things expected of a politician in a particular environment is adapt himself to that environment and work within that environment. You're never going to have the perfect opportunity to do what you ought to do. But we need to strive towards it. And one of the things I think we should do is embrace technology as far as we can in the employment of our elections so that we reduce human handling as much as possible.
But would you say that INEC has demonstrated the capacity or the ability to deliver free and fair elections?
No, I wouldn't.
Using technology?
I wouldn't say that. The last two elections handled by INEC, Oshu and Ekiti, were plagued with inducements of voters, and INEC did not react appropriately. INEC is a referee, and as a referee, if a player is caught cheating, there should be punitive measures. In other words, INEC ought to have sanctioned the parties that were inducing voters. You cannot induce a voter and say it's a free and fair process, right? And INEC was complaining. It's like watching a football match and the referee is complaining about the attitude of a player. You have the whistle, you have the red card, you have the yellow card. If any of those parties had been disqualified for inducement, it would not have happened again. Even at the primary level, we know that delegates are bribed and monies are spent, to induce delegates. It ought not be so. But it's done now as a process, and INEC observes all these things and does nothing about it. So I started off by saying it's an aspiration. We need to aspire towards ensuring that we have a process that is free and fair. Unfortunately, we're not there yet.
All right, then, when you look at the issues that we need to address as a country to get to the next level where we need to be as a nation, would you say you have a full grasp of the issues?
Absolutely.
And how to deal with them?
Absolutely. The two key things plague Nigeria: very low or dismal productivity levels of the Nigerian, which In other words, is high unemployment, low productivity. And the other one is impunity or lack of consequences in our system. So in other words, you don't have a system, a nation that operates by the rule of law. People can get away with anything. But the other part of it is a low productivity. So all your problems, whether it's security, corruption, everything comes back to that. If the average Nigerian had a job to do, if the average Nigerian were productive, a lot of the vices you see in society will automatically be eliminated. So the pursuit of our nation is to increase the productivity level of our people. And the ways of going about that is improve their skills level, available and affordable healthcare, infrastructure, right? Have the right fiscal and monetary policies that ensure that folks can go to a lending institution and obtain funds at an affordable rate, and not what we have now where you're paying between 25 and 30% if you get it at all. And ensure that your judicial system, your policing, your entire judicial process, which includes policing, is one that people are held accountable. Today, in this country, whatever you do, chances are that there are no consequences for doing either the right or the wrong. And I will talk about that as we go further.
No, I'm happy you mentioned the police and some other factors. I think that also brings us back to the issue of the fact that we still have weak institutions. Many of our leaders they have very good intentions, they have these very grand plans that appear workable, and realizable, but we have weak institutions, and that always stands in the way. What would you do? What is your approach to tackling that? And weak institutions cannot be sorted out in 4 years in many instances. I mean, just take the judiciary alone, that's a big deal. So what is your approach?
Weak institutions start off with weak leadership. In setting up institutions, you've got to man them by the right caliber of people. And the right caliber of people with thinking not about themselves, but how they can strengthen the institutions. So if you take the police, for instance, and people who head the various arms of the force are not there out of merit, but out of some other consideration, you've weakened the institution already, okay? And in building institutions, there's this adage where they say every institution is a lengthened shadow of one person. If you have, no matter how strong the institution is, if you put the wrong person there, it will start to crumble. So the primary responsibility of a leader is identifying the right people to head various institutions. And then it becomes a culture. That's what you're talking about. It takes a while. But if you don't start, that culture would not be ingrained in the institution, and that's what we ought to do.
All right. When you look at elections in Nigeria, from previous elections, we've seen the voting patterns, how people vote. People vote based on religious, ethnic lines, and all that. But then some say, on the other hand, that no need. It's a two-horse race. Why bother?
Well, that's changing. People, we don't want to appreciate that. We're evolving. The last election was very instructive. People felt that, these people would vote in this direction on them. But let's take the what we call the middle belt. You had two primary candidates in the last election, one Christian, one Muslim, and you found that a lot of Christians voted for the Muslim candidate. So it wasn't purely a religious affair, right? And a lot of folks voted for a candidate outside their ethno-geographic center. So I think our electorate, whether we admit it or not, are getting more attuned and more matured and realizing that it's not where the person comes from that matters. Even in the southeast, where the candidate from the PDP came from, you could see the lukewarm approach. I think the turnout for the voters there was about 30 or 40%, right? And that compared to 2011, when the turnout was in the upper 80s. So yes, people were like, okay, well, it's not worth coming out. So you could see that the voters' apathy there is a reflection of, we're not just going to support you because you are one of ours, so to speak, okay? And in the Middle Belt, where, you have a large band of Christians, states like Benue, Plateau, that are predominantly Christian populated, voted for the APC. So it's changing. What you really require is voters' education, voters' sensitivity and all that. And as the democracy matures, you find that politicians can't take the electorate any longer for granted.
Well, we know that usually it's what we've always had, that rotation, where the presidency goes to the north, rotates to the southwest. So I'm thinking, at what point is that going to change? I know that at the end of the day, it's all about the voter, the electorate, but that isn't our reality. At the end of the day, it's whose turn is it next?
I'm not so sure,
At what
Esther.
point is that going to change?
I'm not so sure, Esther. I think people are now beginning to express their frustrations, right? This rotational business is a convention. It's unconstitutional. In other words, it's not in the Constitution. Doesn't mean it's wrong, but it's not in the Constitution. It's just a convention. But don't forget that we have gone against those conventions at times. In 2011, we went against that convention, right? At 2015, right, it swung the other way because people felt frustrated.
Yeah, but there were promises that we would return back to that system. Just let this person, just hurry up.
But that doesn't explain, for instance, why the votes in the middle part of the country went the way they did. Okay? It's nice to say that, like herd mentality. We're going to go this way for 4 years and thereafter we'll go this way for another 4 years. But I don't think it's an exact science. And besides, even if we were to adopt it as a convention, maybe the first 4 years you can say, okay, it should go this way. But the next 4 years, you should earn it. It shouldn't be automatic.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time so far. We'll take a short break and we'll be right back. We'll be speaking to Donald Duke, presidential candidate of the Social Democratic Party.
We'll continue our conversation after the break. Stay with us.
Welcome back to Beyond Markets as we continue our 2019 election conversation series.
If you're just joining us, we've been speaking to the presidential candidate of the Social Democratic Party, Donald Duke. I'd like to move on now to, the exciting part of this conversation, the economy. Everybody wants to hear what your plans are for the economy.
Growth. We have an economy in stagnation. One of the Purital conversations we've been having, we're out of recession. We're not out of a recession in our economy. As long as your population growth exceeds your economic growth, you're in a recession. So you have a nation where economic growth is at about 3.2% or thereabout, and your population growth is at about 3.2% or thereabout, and your economic growth is below 2%. So you're in recession. For you to exceed recession, your economy must grow faster than your population or thereabout. To recalibrate our nation, taking into consideration the years of economic neglect, we're not a productive economy, we're a very consumptive, high consumptive economy. You need to grow the economy at between 10 to 15% annually, non-oil, for the next 15 years. Nigeria ought to be about a $2.5 trillion economy, not barely $400 billion economy. So that must be the direction we should go. And of course, your next question is how are we going to achieve that?
Yeah, so you can
First
tell
of
me
all,
how.
Let's take two indices. Your credit system. Our credit system in Nigeria has frustrated growth, particularly the small and medium scale, which is where the bulk of the economy lies. So a small scale manufacturer of whatever goes to a bank and is expected to pay 25% interest on the loan, okay? And the cost of production is quite high in Nigeria, energy and all that. So cost of production may be another 50%. How are you going to generate 75 to 80% to repay back that facility? That is a killer. And so the banking system, the lending system is frustrating growth. That's one. Two, energy. We have continuously done the same thing over and over, getting the same results, and with the attendant frustrations. We're an energy country. At one point, we flared almost 2.5 billion cubic feet of gas daily. That is equivalent to about 25 million liters of diesel. All you need to do is capture the gas, distribute it throughout the country, and because you were flaring it, don't charge consumers of the gas international prices of $7 per standard cubic feet. You can give them for 10 cents. You were flaring it after all. That should be the subsidy to the business world in Nigeria to mitigate the high cost of doing business in Nigeria. So you give them a cushion in some other ways, because you cannot overnight provide all the road infrastructure, the rail infrastructure, and all that. So if you just take two items, the credit, things you can do within 24 to 30 months, address the credit thing. The banks, you can't charge this much, because you see, frankly, the banks are making so much money on other people's money. Those deposits that they lend out are other people's money, but it cannot be at the expense of the entire society. We must find a bracket that we both can live with. That's one. And two, all that energy, all that gas you're flaring, capture it and provide it, make it available to folks. The third thing is this. This is a nation where, let's take the last budget, $8.6 trillion in naira, right? But we're subsidizing fuel for about 1.3, 1.4 trillion. Almost 20% of the budget goes into fuel subsidy. It's crazy. It's crazy. How many people, you're subsidizing people to be on roads that don't exist, okay? If you look at the budget for road construction, for instance, it's probably about 500-600 billion naira. But we're spending 1.2, 1.3 trillion to get people on these roads. That money could be better spent on education.
Okay.
Right? The real subsidy in this country should be the gas I'm talking about.
If I could just quickly take you up on the interest rates again, and specifically what you're going to do, because most times when banks charge between 20, 24, sometimes even 30%, it's because there's a high chance of default on a part of those, and we've seen it happen so many times. Because this small business, his overhead is crazy. He's paying so much for diesel just to stay afloat, and obviously he can't even break even maybe in 1 or 2 years. So the bank looks at him and says, "You're high risk. I cannot afford to give you single digits. Is out of the question." So what would you do specifically? Because we know that the central bank has done so much, and what they do is intervention schemes. In collaboration with the Bank of Industry, for instance, to give single-digit loans. What would you do specifically?
Well,
how low can these interest rates go under a Donald Duke administration?
The bank's presumption is wrong. It's the high interest rates that even further kills the businesses. The central bank has a facility called the RSSF fund. That's a real sector support facility, and it's about 7%. In other words, the central bank knows that 7% is about that level where we can live and let live, and insist that banks that key onto that facility don't charge a percentage more. Okay? The banks are so spoiled, they're not interested in it. They want to charge high interest rates. But the commonsensical thing is that you're making money from a few. Okay? How many businesses do so well that they can support interest in excess of 20, 30%? Very few, if any at all. I doubt it. So they end up trading. Trading, because you're probably your turnaround cycle probably be 90 or 120 days, so it's more affordable. But for a business and investment, it needs a longer term thing. So the premise on the bank saying that because of the high risk, you are making the business even riskier by making the cost of the business higher. Yes, we know that cost of doing business is high in Nigeria, and that's why I've suggested that we should have some buffer, and that's where the energy thing comes in, my proposition on gas and all that. That's fine. But at the same time, you're crippling the business, because the folks who are running the business, their focus is just on paying off the banks rather than even supporting the businesses they're running.
Okay. I'd like to take you up on the revenue challenges the country is having and how you plan to solve them.
That's a critical thing. Our budgetary system is wrong. Let's start from there. If you take the federal budget, it consists of all sorts of projects that are not federal in nature. So the first thing is define what is a federal budget. What is federal responsibility? You could go to a community in either of where we come from and you see in the federal budget, boreholes. Boreholes cannot be a federal responsibility. So folks have thrown in all sorts of things into the budget over the years that are totally meaningless or totally not the responsibility of the federal government. So you need to tidy up that process. The second thing is, where are you getting your monies from? Taxes? That is fine. However, there must be a cutoff date when you can pay the taxes. If, for instance, I said, by the 31st of March, if you do not obtain a tax clearance for the previous year, you cannot operate any bank account. And that's, I'm talking of corporate bodies now, not individuals. Okay. There'll be pressure on them to pay their taxes. Right now, there's no pressure on anybody to pay taxes. We've talked of VIDS and all those things, but there's no pressure. The pressure is if you cannot operate that account or your business accounts anywhere in the country. And it's easier now that we have a BVN. And I think BVN is one of the most innovative things we've done in this country. And we've got to give credit to the former administration on this. Then people will be compelled to pay taxes. Then you need to look at the tax system. It's so untidy. Education tax, this, that. No, tidy it up. You can remove all those things and have one, call it transaction tax. In other words, any monies that goes through a system, right? The government takes a percentage. It could be 1 or 2%, right? Because right now your taxes are based on profits. A company policy may be such that we don't want to declare profit, we want to reinvest. But the government has a responsibility to provide infrastructure and all that, so it must get the money from somewhere. So those are some of the innovative things you've got to look at. And because you see, for a $400 billion economy, our budget should be about 20% of that. Right now it's about 6-7%. We're not doing well at all. So we should be budgeting about between 80 to 100 billion dollars.
So that would
annually.
Probably mean we will have to borrow more because really
I don't think you need to. But I don't think we've exhausted. What I'm trying to say here is that we have not exhausted all that we could within before borrowing. Borrowing is the easy way out because you're not willing to do
the hard work.
To do the hard work of extracting the funds that are latent in your system.
Okay. I'd just like you to put in a word in on your plans for human capital development. We've seen the indices out there where the poverty capital of the world, where it's
I talked to productivity, Ken, and which is the basis of everything. And to increase the productivity, you've got to look at skills, not just education. We're largely educated people, but we're low on skills, right? Skills, healthcare, provision of infrastructure. Those are things that would enhance the productivity and take us out of this poverty bracket. In other words, I would want to see every brain literally trained. In other words, free education. How do we afford that? Yes, we can afford it. If it's a function, and it also...
Up to what level? Free education, for who?
For the first 18 years of your life. So let's say for up to the 18 years, that's when you're an adult. Okay. And that's for up to senior secondary school level.
Okay. We must thank you so much for your time today. Thank you so much for talking to us today. It's been a pleasure having you
so much.
on the show. We've been speaking to Donald Duke, presidential candidate of the Social Democratic Party.
That's all we have on today's show. As always, you can watch all previous episodes of Beyond Markets on our website, cnbcafrica.com.
Don't forget, you can always join the conversation online too. On Twitter, just send tweets to @CNBC Africa. Use the hashtag Beyond Markets and hashtag 2019 Elections 410. You can also follow me on Twitter at Esther O. Awuni.
Follow me also at Kenneth Igbomo, and do have a wonderful evening, and thanks for watching.
Bye for now.